I left my house before sunrise with a small bag and a quiet heart. I did not leave a note. I did not say goodbye. I had emptied my savings the night before, every dollar I had worked for, and I told myself it was the only way to breathe again. The house was still. The walls felt tired of holding my silence. As I closed the door, I felt relief and fear walk beside me. I thought disappearing would give everyone peace, including me. 2 days later, my phone rang in a cheap motel room, rain tapping the window like questions. It was my brother. He was screaming my name, loud and broken, asking what I had done. I held the phone, frozen, realizing that leaving did not end the pain. It only moved it. At that moment, I understood how far my choices had traveled without asking permission. I grew up in a small house that always smelled like coffee and old wood. My parents worked hard, and they believed silence meant strength. My brother was older than me by 5 years. He was loud, confident, and always sure of his place. I was the quiet one, the listener, the one who cleaned up after dinner while everyone else talked. At the family table, I learned early how to disappear without leaving the room. When our parents passed, the house became heavier. My brother moved in with his family, and I stayed nearby to help. I told myself it was temporary. Days turned into years. I paid bills without questions. I covered small gaps when money ran short. No one asked me to, but no one stopped me either. It felt easier to give than to explain how tired I was. Most evenings, I sat alone in my kitchen, the clock ticking loud. I would stare at my bank app and tell myself it was fine. Family helps family. That was the rule I grew up with. Still, something inside me felt thin, like a thread pulled too tight. I never said no. I never asked for help. I thought love meant endurance, even when it hurt. I kept my worries folded away, like letters never sent, telling myself tomorrow would be calmer, kinder, and easier. I believed patience could fix everything if I waited long enough. And I stayed. That was my habit. Back then, it mattered. My brother and I were never cruel to each other. That made it harder. He trusted me without asking, and I gave without counting. When he spoke, people listened. When I spoke, I softened my words. I did not want to cause trouble. His children called me often. They needed rides, school supplies, and small comforts. I said yes every time, smiling into the phone. At night, I lay awake, listening to the house settle. Rain would tap the windows, slow and steady. I imagined my life as a room with no doors. I loved my family, but I felt invisible. I began to hide small things, like my fears and my hopes. I stopped dreaming out loud. The savings account was my quiet safety. It was not large, but it was mine. I told myself it was for emergencies, for someday to rest. Little by little, it shrank. A repair here, a loan there. I did not keep track anymore. I trusted love to remember for me. One afternoon, my brother joked, "You're always here. What would we do without you?" I laughed softly, but my chest tightened. I wanted to say I was tired. I wanted to say I was afraid. Instead, I nodded. That was how things were. Calm on the outside, heavy on the inside. I thought strength meant staying quiet, even when my heart asked for space. I did not know how close I was to breaking. That truth waited, in silence, for me, alone. Still, as I left the office, I stood outside and breathed in the cool air. I thought about my parents, my sister, the distance now between us. It hurt, but it did not break me. I understood then that the turning point was not the argument. It was the moment I chose to honor my son's love instead of chasing approval. And once I made that choice, there was no going back. Life did not suddenly become peaceful after that. Healing was slow. Some mornings, I still woke up with a heaviness in my chest, reaching for a phone that no longer rang. But something had shifted. The fear was quieter now. I began making small changes. Nothing dramatic. I fixed the broken cabinet in the kitchen. I bought new curtains for the living room, soft ones that let the light in. Each choice felt like a quiet promise to myself. I used part of the money to clear debts I had carried for years. Signing those papers, I felt a release I had not known I needed. Not joy, just relief. The kind that lets you breathe deeper. My parents remained distant. Weeks passed without a call. At first, I counted the days. Then I stopped. I learned how silence can be both painful and protective. One evening, I cooked my son's favorite meal. I set one plate on the table, then paused. Slowly, I put it back in the cupboard. I ate alone, but I did not feel abandoned. I felt present. Sometimes I talked to him out loud, while washing dishes, while folding clothes. "I'm trying," I would say, and in the quiet, I felt understood. I often thought about forgiveness, not as something owed to others, but as something I might need for myself. I was not ready yet, and that was okay. One afternoon, a letter arrived from my mother. Her handwriting was familiar, careful. Inside, she wrote that she missed me, that things had gotten out of hand. She did not apologize, but she softened. I folded the letter and set it aside. I was not rushing back. This time, I would move at my own pace. For the first time in a long while, I trusted myself to know when I was ready. As the months passed, my life found a new rhythm. It was quieter than before, but steadier. I learned how to sit with my thoughts without letting them overwhelm me. Grief still visited, but it no longer stayed all day. I began volunteering at a local community center. Just a few hours a week, I helped with paperwork, made tea, and listened to stories. There was comfort in being useful without being needed too much. Some days I saw my son in the kindness of strangers. Other days I felt him in the pauses between conversations. My sister reached out once more. We met at a small cafe halfway between our homes. Rain tapped softly against the window. She looked tired, older. "I didn't mean for it to become a fight," she said, staring into her cup. "I know," I replied, and I meant that too. She admitted she had felt entitled, that our parents' expectations had shaped her more than she realized. It was not a full apology, but it was honest. We spoke carefully, like people walking on cracked ground. When we parted, we hugged, briefly, gently. It was not a return to closeness, but it was a beginning. I continued planning my future slowly. I set aside money for safety, not luxury. I thought about traveling someday, maybe taking a class, living without constant worry. One evening, I sat on the porch as the sun went down. The sky turned soft shades of orange and gray. I felt a quiet gratitude, not for the loss, never for that, but for the strength that followed. I realized then that honoring my son did not mean holding on to pain. It meant living in a way that reflected his care, his steadiness, his love. And in doing so, I was slowly becoming whole again. The final piece of healing came quietly, without warning. It happened on an ordinary morning while I was sorting through old papers. I found a photo of my son and me sitting on the front steps years ago. We were laughing at something small. I could not remember what, but I remembered the feeling. Safe. Enough. I placed the photo on the shelf in the living room. Not hidden away, not framed in grief, just a present. Like him. I wrote back to my parents a few weeks later, a short letter. I told them I loved them. I told them I needed boundaries. I did not explain myself again. I did not defend my choices. I simply stated them. That was new for me. Their reply was slower this time. When it came, it was careful, respectful. We were not healed as a family, but we were no longer at war. I understood then that resolution does not always look like a reunion. Sometimes it looks like peace inside your own chest. I used a small portion of the inheritance to set up a scholarship in my son's name at the community center. Nothing grand, just enough to help someone trying quietly, the way he always did. Signing the papers, I felt close to him again. That night, I slept deeply. No dreams, no weight. I still miss him every day. That will never change. But the missing no longer controls me. It walks beside me now. The house still creaks at night. The kitchen table still holds memories, but it also holds new mornings, new choices, and new calm. I learned that love does not end with loss, and honoring someone does not mean disappearing for them. Sometimes it means staying, choosing yourself, and living on gently with everything they gave you. Now when I look back on everything, I see it more clearly, not as one long moment of pain, but as many small moments where I learned who I was. Loss stripped away my habits of pleasing others. It left me with only what mattered. I still think about the funeral I did not attend. I no longer judge myself for it. Grief has many shapes. Mine needed silence, not crowds. Love does not prove itself through public acts. Sometimes it survives in private spaces. I understand now that money was never the real issue. It was control. It was old expectations dressed up as concern. Standing my ground was not an act of defiance. It was an act of care for my son and for myself. My family is different now, quieter, more distant, but also more honest. I no longer carry the weight of their approval. I carry my own sense of peace. Some evenings I sit at the kitchen table as the light fades. I hear the soft sounds of the house settling. I breathe in, I breathe out, I feel grounded. If there's one thing this journey taught me, it is that love does not demand sacrifice that destroys you. Real love leaves room for you to stand. And I am standing now. I tell this story not because it is easy to share, but because it is real. Many of us are taught to stay quiet, to give in, and to keep peace at any cost. But peace that costs your voice is not peace at all. I learned that grief can make people uncomfortable. It can make them rush, demand answers, and look for solutions that feel tidy. But grief is not tidy. It asks for patience. It asks for honesty. My son's love did not end when he died. It changed shape. It became the strength that helped me say no. It became the calm that stayed with me when others walked away. It became the guide that helped me choose a life that felt true. If you are listening to this and carrying a quiet struggle of your own, I want you to know something. You are allowed to protect what matters to you. You are allowed to move at your own pace. You are allowed to choose yourself without guilt. Family can be important. So can forgiveness. But neither should come at the cost of your well-being. I still miss my son. I always will. But I also live with hope now. Hope that grows in small ways, in quiet mornings, in honest choices, in gentle strength. And if there is a lesson in all of this, it is simple. Even after loss, even after pressure, you can still build a life that feels like your own. If this story touched something in you, take a quiet moment with it. You're not alone in carrying grief, pressure, or unspoken pain. If you feel comfortable, share your thoughts in the comments. Sometimes telling even a small part of your story helps lighten the weight. And if you know someone who is struggling to choose themselves, someone who feels torn between love and obligation, consider sharing this story with them. Please like this video and subscribe to the channel. It helps these stories reach the people who need them most. Until next time, be gentle with your heart. Healing does not rush, and your story, like mine, still matters. The change did not happen all at once. It arrived quietly, like dust settling where no one looks. My brother began to call more often. At first, it was small things, a late bill, a short loan until payday. His voice always sounded rushed, but warm. "I'll pay you back next week," he would say. I always answered, "Of course, take your time." I told myself this was normal. Family leans on family. Still, my chest felt tight after each call. I started checking my phone with a kind of worry I could not explain. When I saw his name, my stomach would sink, even before I answered. The house felt smaller. Silence followed me from room to room. I began skipping meals without noticing. At night, I replayed conversations in my head, wondering why I felt guilty for feeling tired. I had no reason to complain. Everyone depended on me. That should have felt good. One evening, my brother came by unannounced. He stood in my kitchen, tapping the counter. He didn't sit down. "You know I wouldn't ask if it wasn't serious," he said. I nodded, even though he hadn't told me what he needed yet. As he spoke, I watched the light fade outside the window. My thoughts drifted to my savings. I could see the numbers clearly, shrinking in my mind. I wanted to ask questions. I wanted to slow things down. Instead, I said yes again. The word left my mouth easily, like it had been practiced. After he left, I stood alone in the kitchen. The clock was loud. The sink was full. I pressed my hand against the counter to steady myself. A thought crossed my mind, soft but sharp. What about me? I pushed it away. That felt selfish. From that night on, something shifted. I felt like I was holding my breath all the time. I smiled less. I slept lighter. I began to feel trapped by my own kindness, even though I did not yet have the courage to name it. The tension was growing, slow and quiet, waiting for its moment. Weeks passed, and the calls did not stop. They blended into my days like background noise. I would be folding laundry or washing dishes when my phone lit up. I already knew what the conversation would sound like. The same careful urgency, the same promise to fix things soon. I stopped checking the calendar. Soon had no shape anymore. I noticed changes in myself first. I became quieter, even with friends. When they asked how I was doing, I smiled and said, "I'm fine." It felt easier than explaining the weight I carried. My home no longer felt like rest. It felt like a waiting room. One afternoon, I opened my bank account and stared at the numbers. They looked wrong, like they belonged to someone else. I felt a wave of fear, slow and cold. My hands shook. I whispered, "It's okay," to an empty room, hoping I would believe it. I closed the app without making a plan. My brother stopped asking how I was doing. Our talks became short and practical. "I need help again," he said one night. I paused longer than usual. "Okay," I answered, hearing the strain in my own voice. After the call, I sat on the edge of my bed. The room was dark. Rain pressed softly against the window. I thought about my future, and it felt blurry. I realized I had not imagined it in a long time. Everything I had went outward. Nothing came back. At a family dinner, my brother laughed and said, "You always land on your feet." Everyone smiled. I did too. Inside, something cracked. I wanted to say that my feet were tired, that I was slipping. Instead, I passed the bread and stayed quiet. That night, I cried without sound. I felt ashamed of my tears, as if needing relief was a failure. I told myself to be stronger, to hold on a little longer, but the tension had grown heavy now. It lived in my chest. It followed me everywhere. I was no longer choosing to help. I felt cornered by love, and that scared me more than being alone. The breaking point began to circle me, even though I did not see it yet. My brother's voice changed. It carried expectation now, not gratitude. When I hesitated, even for a breath, he noticed. "You're okay, right?" he asked once. "Yes," I said quickly. Too quickly. I started lying to myself. I told myself this was temporary. I told myself I was strong enough. But my body knew the truth. I woke up tired. My chest felt tight for no clear reason. Even quiet moments felt loud. One evening, I tried to speak. We were standing by his car, the engine running. "I can't keep doing this," I said softly. He frowned, confused. "What do you mean? You're the only one I can count on." The words landed heavy. They were not meant to hurt, but they did. They felt like a lock clicking shut. I nodded, even though my heart was racing. I did not explain. I did not argue. I went home and sat in the dark. That night, I checked my savings again. There was almost nothing left. I felt cold. A thought came, clear and frightening. If I stay, I will lose myself. I cried slowly, wiping my face, careful not to make noise, as if someone might hear my thoughts. The next morning, my brother sent a message asking for help again. I stared at the screen. My hands shook. I did not reply. For the first time, silence felt louder than saying yes. I began to imagine leaving, not in anger, in quiet. I pictured a door closing gently. I felt guilt, fear, and something close to relief. The idea scared me, but it also felt honest. I knew something had to change. I did not know how to explain myself. I only knew I was empty. And when you're empty, even love can feel like pressure. That was when I made my decision. Slowly, carefully, without telling anyone. The tension had reached its limit, and I stepped toward the edge, not knowing what would happen next. The night before I left, the house felt different. Not louder, not sadder, just clear. I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of cold tea and opened my bank account one last time. The number was small, but it was what remained of me. I stared at it for a long time, feeling both fear and calm sitting side by side. I thought about calling my brother. I even picked up the phone. Then I imagined his voice, the worry turning into pressure, the questions I could not answer without breaking. I put the phone down. Some truths need silence before they can breathe. I withdrew the money the next morning. The bank was quiet. The teller smiled kindly, unaware of how heavy my hands felt. As I walked out, the air felt sharp and clean. I told myself I was not running away. I was stepping back. Packing did not take long. I had already let go of so much. I folded clothes slowly, touching each one like a memory. The house echoed as I moved through it. In the bedroom, I paused, listening to my own breathing. For the first time in years, it felt like mine. I did not leave a note. I knew any words would sound like excuses. I locked the door and stood there, keys cold in my palm. I whispered, "I'm sorry," to no one in particular. Then I walked away. The drive was quiet. No music, just the sound of the road and my thoughts. Fear rose and fell like waves, but underneath was something steady. I felt like I was choosing myself, even though I did not know what that would cost. The first full day after I left felt unreal. I woke up confused, unsure where I was. The room was plain, white walls, thin curtains, a quiet hum from the street outside. No voices, no expectations, just me. I sat on the edge of the bed and tried to breathe through the guilt that had followed me there. I kept checking my phone, even though it stayed silent. Part of me hoped no one had noticed. Another part felt hurt that no one had. I walked to a small cafe nearby and ordered tea. My hands trembled as I held the cup. I watched strangers talk and laugh, living lives untouched by my choices. It felt strange to be invisible in a new way.